Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to spend some time with you. Steve is about 10 minutes down the road from me, maybe 20 minutes. I just bought coffee right next to his house. And I think I haven't had the chance to meet the rest of you yet, so I'm excited to hear from you and your thoughts. Um, but I want to start just by saying how much I feel indebted to Chovevei. I showed up in 2008. In 2006, my Rosh Yeshiva from Ali Gilborough, David Bigman, I told him I wanted to study to become a rabbi, but that I was looking for a place that wouldn't just teach me the halacha, the laws that you need, which in Israel there are many fine institutions that do that. I wanted a place that would teach me actually the skills to be a rabbi, not the technical halachic information, um, but how to be a rabbi. And my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi David Bigman, told me, they just started this yeshiva in New York. I think it might be interesting for you. Call Rabbi Avi Weiss. And when I called Rabbi Weiss and I told him, I want to be a rabbi in Israel, I think you in America have the skills that I want to learn. And he told me, don't come here. We're training rabbis for America. I'm sorry. I don't know how to train rabbis for Israel. We're really focused on communities in America. That's what we want to do. And being a chutzpahdik Israeli, I told him, en sikui. Um, Let me come to New York. I'll learn what I need to learn, and I'll be on the translation. I'll try to figure out how to translate what I can learn in Riverdale or on the Upper West Side it was at the time, to what would be relevant for an Israeli context. And despite my nice American accent, it's really a Baka accent. I was born in Yerushalayim, and I grew up there. My father, who's a Jewish educator at the Hartman Institute, dragged us to Cleveland, Ohio for a year in third grade and to Washington, D.C. for kindergarten. So I got a good American vocabulary. Um, and in many ways have been back and forth from Israel to America over my life a few times. But at the end of the day, it was clear to me that I wanted to do my rabbinic work in Israel. And part of what I want to share with you is some thoughts and explorations that I have about what it means to do rabbinic work in Israel, and mostly where is it that rabbinic work is most needed. Um, I'd be really delighted for this to be more of a question and answer and comments and ideas. Um, there isn't one Israel. There are many different elements of Israel, and there are some that I work with and interact with a lot, and there are others that I have less interaction with. But I think I'm a little bit yotzei dofen. I'm a little bit out of the ordinary, also among Israeli rabbis in the worlds that I traverse, and I want to share with you some of that and how I feel that's become especially relevant in these very challenging days. Um, but let me start with, can we just do a little bit of kvelling? Last week was Yom Ha'atzmaut, and mostly I'm actually not going to talk about my synagogue, about my shul, Kilat Klausner. But last week was Yom Ha'atzmaut, and the photographer just sent us the pictures. One of our shul members, who's actually a single mother, she's a really an amazing photographer. So she just sent us the pictures. So I just want to lashvitz for a second. This is these are our sixth graders with their daglanut. This was Hallel. We're here we are in our sports center. We hire from a school. We rent out a space from a school. So this is during Hallel. But before Hallel, before Yom Ha'atzmaut, we have what I think has become more prominent across Israel, kind of a tekes ma'ava, where we will speak about Yom HaZikaron and about Yom Ha'atzmaut. Here, these are the kids giving out falafel at the end, but that's not what I wanted. I want to start with this picture. These are the kindergartners doing their little dance. The people leading the dance are the teenagers who taught them how to do the dance. This is the kids choir. It's my daughter right there in the middle. And we had 450 people crammed into our basketball court, praying and dancing and crying, and trying to figure out what is this moment. Um, and during my brief words, at that moment of transition from Yom HaZikaron, from the day of the memorial for fallen soldiers, to the day of Yom Ha'atzmaut, I asked the community, I say, how do we move from Yom HaZikaron to Yom Ha'atzmaut when the situation is so dire, when it feels that whatever harm our enemies aren't able to inflict on us, that we are able to inflict on each other? And how do we leave Yom HaZikaron when Yom HaZikaron isn't today, we've had 572 Yom HaZikaron in Israel, um, as you know well. And we have 572 days of hostages who can't move from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaTzmaut. They're stuck in those tunnels in that place. How do we move to Yom HaTzmaut? Um, and first of all, I told the Kehillah, I don't know. It's not that I have any great answers. And I think just even standing in that not knowing is important, that moment of humility. I think that we need in this moment when facing these historic moments that we're in and that we don't know the end game of. Um, but also I shared with them that I think it helps me to remember that Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Day of Independence, is not about the state of Israel. It's not about how we're doing. We're not celebrating that we're doing well or bemoaning if we're not doing well. And in many ways, I think the state of Israel is doing amazingly well, and in other ways, I think it's doing terribly. But Yom Ha'atzmaut is not about that. We have all the 364 other days in which we talk about how is Israel doing, and in Israel there isn't one prime minister. There are 10 million prime ministers. Only one of them is actually elected to the role. All the rest of them just spend the whole day thinking what they would do if they were prime minister. Um, and Yom Ha'atzmaut is actually a day to let go of all that and simply celebrate the fact that the state of Israel exists, that it exists. And then, and to give us the koach that we need to get through the next 364 days in this state of Israel and figure out what it is that we need to do and what is our role, each one of us as citizens, or in this case, as supporters of the state of Israel, what is that we do? And I want to say this with humility, but there are moments when you speak to a crowd and you know that they're not with you, and there are moments when you speak to a crowd and you know that you have them, that you've said something that sort of pierces the room. And I really felt that as I was speaking. One of the more moving, sorry, um, one of the more moving moments for me is that one of the members in the shul was recording my speech and then sent it out in the WhatsApp, and I got a message back from one of the soldiers in our community, a reservist. Barry couldn't be with his wife and family in Yom Ha'atzmaut. Um, and he just wrote me back to say, "Hi, I'm here, outside Lebanon, and I shared your speech with the Chevra in my unit. And we have all kinds of opinions and all kinds of people, and Jews and non-Jews in our brigade. And they found it very moving. That was our Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration. We sat and watched, this random rabbi in Tapiot give a speech about what Yom Ha'atzmaut is. So, I didn't think I would be so moved to tell you that story, so you'll just have to bear with me. That's that's where I'm at this evening. Um, so I'll collect myself, and I want to say that I want to move from this moment of Yom Ha'atzmaut to really thinking about what it means to be thinking about being a rabbi in Israel outside outside of a synagogue community. Um, and despite the fact that I think in many ways at Chopave, so much of the great training I got, and that I also proud to, as Rabbi Yonah mentioned, help Chopave build a training program like this for Israeli rabbis in Israel. I want to talk about leadership outside the synagogue and what that means and what that looks like. Um, and I'll just say briefly a few more words about myself. So I was born in Yerushalayim to two wonderful educators. My father, Noam Tzion, who was one of the founders of the Hartman Institute, and who in 1997 had the guts to put out a Haggadah called A Different Night that has really changed the way so many Jews celebrate Pesach with over 300,000 copies in print. And when I was a soldier and I was bored, I had the privilege of working with him on an Israeli version of that Haggadah, Haggadah Israelit. And that came out 20 years ago. And last year we put out a new version of it, which was also very successful, and has really changed the way Israelis also look at their Seder nights. My mother is not a Jewish educator. She is a therapist and childbirth educator. She spent the first half of her life working with young children and giving birth and young parents. And she spent the second half of her life working with Holocaust survivors. And on October 7th, she got a phone call from the police. She used to work with the police, and they said, "Can you help us with our policemen who are now trauma survivors from October 7th?" And since then, she's found herself over the last almost 2 years doing bereavement circles for for the Jerusalem municipality. And she laughs. She says, "We have the full circle. We have bereavement for parents, bereavement for grandparents, bereavement for uncles, bereavement for siblings. Um, so many circles of pain and of healing." And we sit down every few weeks, and she's like, "Okay, you're going to give me some of your rabbi skills. I'm going to give you some of my therapist skills," and we talk about how to compare those two. And I grew up in the neighborhood of Talpiot in Jerusalem, which is sort of on the south of Jerusalem, where Jerusalem ends. And as a kid, I promised I would never live in Talpiot because it's boring here and nothing ever happens, and the number 7 bus never shows up. And of course, now I live in the neighborhood of Talpiot. After living on the Upper West Side for 5 years, we felt like it was okay to go back and live in my family's neighborhood. And I had mamash the zchut together with my wife and with some other wonderful, wonderful families to found a synagogue in 2017 called the Klausner Minyan. We started 20 families. We're now 130 families and growing. And I have 4 daughters. The oldest is 18. She's going to be joining the army in 2 months. And I'm both proud as hell and freaking out at the same time. Um, and my youngest is a second grader. And since she's been in the world, she's had 2 years of pandemic and 2 years of war. And what she looks at as what we see as continually non-normal is just her normal. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how do I embrace that perspective because I think we are in a deeply new normal in so many ways. In Israel and in America, it doesn't mean that things will necessarily keep going downhill. It just means that they're not going to go ever going back to being the same of what they were. The 90s are over, so I'm told. So my daughters tell me whenever I put on music. Um, all this to say that I think the challenge of being a rabbi in Israel and being a shul rabbi, a community-minded rabbi, is that Israel was founded in many ways so that we wouldn't need synagogues anymore. Or at least so we thought. I'll put it differently. In Chutz La'aretz, we had to go to shul to be Jewish together. In Israel, we can just do that in the street. So that doesn't mean we don't also need shuls. We can have a whole conversation about that. But the question is, what does it mean to be a rabbi in the streets in Israel? What does it mean to be a rabbi in the public sphere? What does it mean to be a rabbi in the Knesset? And we've had models of that. What does it mean to be a rabbi in the media? What does it mean to be a rabbi in on social media? What does it mean to be a rabbi who is at the intersections where Israelis are having their conversations? And I think we have a few models of that. Rav Avi, I think in many ways, is a rabbi in the streets. In Israel, we have Rav Beni Lau and Rabbi Tamar El-Ad and other rabbis who are in many ways rabbis in the streets. My question has led me to a slightly different direction. And that is to ask, not what does it mean to be a shul rabbi who then goes out into the street, but rather who are the people in the street, in the public sphere, who are doing rabbinic work, but we don't call them rabbis. They're doing rabbinic work in the sense of bringing people together, focusing people on values, asking the bigger questions of the soul, of the spirit, and using Jewish language and Jewish tools to do that. And it might not be at all through a halachic perspective, but it is very much the kind of community work that we know to recognize when we're in Chutz La'aretz, right? That's what rabbis and healthy communities do. So about 9 years ago, I was asked by the Mandel Foundation to try and build a program for leadership in Jewish identity in Israel and to try and shape and impact the way Israeli Jewish identity plays out in the public sphere. And they wanted me to work with educators because that's what foundations know how to fund. And I spent a year of research and development on it and worked with Ruth Calderon, who we still work very closely with, and Bambi Sheleg of blessed memory. And we came back to them and we said, if we want to impact Israeli Jewish identity, we need to work not in the field of education, we need to work in the field of culture and media. And we need the Israeli leaders of culture and media to have a Jewish language and a leadership language about what they are doing. I'll give you three examples of what I mean. Um, Livnat Ben Chamo is an Israeli woman in her 30s, born in Ashdod. Um, and she, at the age of 18, was recruited to the army, to her surprise, to Galei Tzahal. Galei Tzahal, the Israeli radio platform. She comes from a Mizrahi home, a Moroccan home, and she loves pop music and rock, but she also loves piyutim. And at a time when no one was listening to piyutim, and no one was playing piyutim on the Israeli radio, she started playing piyutim. Israeli, North African, Iraqi, Algerian music that belongs in the synagogues, but was then started, it just started being played by some of Israel's leading artists, Ehud Banai, Micha Shitrit, other names that you might recall. She's the one who said we should be playing this on the radio. She started playing it at 2 a.m. Then she played it at midnight. Then she played it at 10 p.m. And slowly, together with a whole host of other people as well, they started inserting into Israel's soundtrack, right, Israeli piyutim. None of this would have happened without the musicians who were doing it. And by the way, the Avichai Foundation that was helping fund this in so many ways. But at the end of the day, if it's not played on the radio, it doesn't exist. And someone who needs to understand what that is. For the last 8 years, Livnat Ben Chamo, most popular radio show, is broadcast on Fridays between 2 and 4 p.m. When I met Livnat, I told her, you know what you're doing? She said, what? I told her, you're doing Kabbalat Shabbat for the state of Israel. Every Friday, thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers in their bases, mothers in the kitchen, grandparents in their living room, people driving home on a Friday afternoon from the beach. They're all tuning into you, and you're doing Kabbalat Shabbat. You're not the first person to broadcast in those hours, but you're the first person who thinks of what she's doing as what song do I start with that is connected to Yemei HaShavua, to the days of the week, and what song that by the time that I play the last song at 3:56, it already feels like Shabbos. And how do I talk about that? And how do I bring in themes of Parshat HaShavua without saying that's Parshat HaShavua? And how do I never interview a rabbi, but always talk about Torah, but do it one level under what people see? And through working with her and people like her, I tried to share with her, how can she reframe what it is that she's doing in those perspectives? Um, um, I'll give you a second example. Ronen Yitzhaki is a choreographer. He does dance. For years, he was one of the best Israeli choreographers in the secular world. And then he started working with yeshiva students. You might not have noticed, and yeshiva students haven't noticed, but they actually have bodies. In the yeshivot, we do everything we can to ignore them, those bodies. But Ronen Yitzhaki said, what happens if yeshiva students tried to dance their Torah? And he founded a dance troupe called Ben Shamayim La'aretz of yeshiva students and Torah scholars who try to dance their Torah and start rediscovering languages of dance, Hasidic dance, Yemenite dance, Moroccan dance. We actually have those languages. We just haven't used them in those ways. When I met Ronen, he was already working on those kinds of Israeli dance, but again, he didn't have the language with which to do that work. And so much of the leadership work I try to do is what we call at Mandel, moving from intuition to articulation. And I think that's part of what, for example, at Chovevei, we also do in our process groups and in other places. We try to say, okay, I have these instincts, I have this knowledge within me. How do I articulate it? How do I turn it into a vision? And if it's a vision, then I can also talk about what are the ethical implications of that? What are the professional implications of that? Who can I collaborate with on that? What is the grander vision towards which I'm working? Ronen was a participant in our program at Mandel and now teaches dance and choreography in 3 of Israel's leading dance institutions, training a new generation of people who can do the kind of work he does. So those are 2 examples, and I can go on, and we'll get into a few other examples, but that, if we weren't in times of crisis, that's what I would be talking to you about. I would say, okay, how do we not only do good rabbinic work in synagogues, in schools, in yeshivot, but how do we also look to who are doing the kind of rabbinic work. They don't call themselves rabbis. They're not serving necessarily the Dati community. It's not about Dati or Chiloni. It's not about the denominations. It's not about Datu Medina. It's about everything beyond that. It's not about what are the laws. It's about what are the culture. What is the culture? And the culture will then define what the next laws will be and what the next conversations will be. And I think part of the pleasure of Israel in the last 20 years, and there are so many pleasures of Israel in the last 20 years, and a big part of it is culture. We see it on Netflix, the way Israeli TV has exploded in such a fascinating, interesting way, telling so many diverse Israeli stories. I don't know if you watch TV and if you saw the the counterpart to Shtisel, which I know many American Jews saw, but I don't know if you saw the new Black Shababnikim on Netflix. So highly recommended. Eliran Malka and Eden Abitbol, the showrunner and one of the screenwriters. I work closely with them. We just last week had a special screening of the last episode of season 3 of Shababnikim. I'll just explain since I already went down this rabbit hole. Shababnikim is a show about mostly Sephardic Haredi Jews in a yeshiva. Shababnikim is the nickname in Haredi language for the kids who are misbehaving, the teenagers who are doing whatever they want. And more than anything else, these Haredi guys want to be Israeli. They want to connect to Israeli culture. They want to be accepted by Israelis, but they also are not willing to take any gutsy moves to go outside of their comfort zone as Haredi Jews. And for 3 episodes, that's funny. And then after October 7th, it's not funny anymore. After October 7th, it's not enough for us to watch, oh, look at these cute Haredim who want to crack jokes and go to Mamila and buy an espresso machine, but they don't know what good coffee is, right? That's the premise for the first or second episode of the series. After October 7th, we can't stop thinking, why are you not joining the army? And I can say that we've had that same thing. My cousin is a Baal Tshuva. She's Haredi. Her two older sons are 24 and 21, able-bodied, well-adjusted young men. Their cousins are serving in the army. Their uncles are serving in reserve duty. They're studying Torah at the Vishnitz Yeshiva. And when we were invited to one of their weddings, my mother said, I don't know how I can go and dance with all these yeshiva students. I'm so glad that Eliashiv is getting married, but if I sit there, all I'll be thinking is, why aren't all these guys in the army? Long story short, on our family side is we ended up going for the chuppah and leaving right after the chuppah. Fittingly, the way Avelim do when they're in their Shnat Evil. Felt like we're in our Shnat Evil, we can't stay at this wedding for the whole duration of it. If I go back to Shababnikim, the last episode of season 3, the screenwriters understood they have to figure out a way to bring these Haredi cool guys into the story of October 7th. And I won't spoil it for you. It's supposed to air on Netflix in a few weeks. But the last episode of the season basically sends them in search of a pair of tefillin that one of the kibbutznikim's father left for him in the kibbutz, and they sort of find their way into one of the kibbutzim outside Gaza, and a whole series of hilarity and very painful and powerful moments ensue. When Israelis watch that episode, something about their relationship to Haredim will change. Maybe when Haredim watch that episode, something about their relationship to the army will change. It's not going to change everything, but culture has the power to change the story. And when the story changes, the emotions change, the relationships change, then afterwards, perhaps the actions, and then eventually the politics and the law can change. That's a big part of where my work is. So we sort of started with what it means to do Israeli culture. What does it mean to do that kind of rabbinic work, that kind of storytelling outside the synagogue? And I think you can sort of see, I try to bring my sort of quote rabbinic instincts into this work to try and get people to think more rabbinically about their work of culture.
Can I ask you just for a second to like can you give us an example of like, okay, so you're having this conversation, these people are working on this thing, you see this, you say, okay, I'm a rabbi, right? I'm a rabbi for the street, okay? They're doing this thing, I want this thing to be more, what? More Jewish, more connecting, like what's the question you're asking yourself, and how are you then asking that question of them? Like what's the conversation you're having? I just like get us
Yeah.
into your work.
Good question. I mean, first of all, I want to say, when I look at them, I don't say I'm the rabbi for the street. I say you're the rabbi in the street. They're
Good.
doing the work, um, right? More powerfully than anything else. I'll give you two
Thanks. Yeah.
examples. One of the people I work with closely is the head of the culture department in Tel Aviv municipality, Gior Yalom. His office is right outside what is now Kikar Chatufim, inside the library of Beit Ariela. He found himself suddenly basically responsible for this place called Kikar Chatufim and trying to figure out how to manage it. Um, and one of the ways, and I sat down in his office, and we said, well, let's think about. I told him, look, let's think about communal space we know. So he says, well, I know a theater, I know a museum, I know an opera house, I know a city square. This doesn't resemble any of those things I know. I told him, I look at Kihar Chatufim, I see a multiplex synagogue. I see a place where people are going on pilgrimage from across Israel to go to. I see a space that is like an ongoing shiva. I see a space that has to have peak moments. It can't always be the same. It needs to keep changing. I see a place that needs to give you a sense of communality. When people walk into that space, they need to feel like they can take ownership of it. They can't feel like customers. They need to feel like participants, or better yet, like shutafim, like partners in this. Um, and something about that conversation helped Giora to figure out what are the rules that they want to set for how this space is going to be managed, how they're treating the family. So, for example, one of the things that came out of my conversation with him is that they made a special room inside the library on the left side of Kikar Tufim, as Beit Ariel, the library said, the families need a place to be. Just like at a very intense Shiva, the family needs a room to run away from Shiva, right? So they created for them a space where the families can be without the public. Um, but just by thinking about this space, for me, thinking about it in Jewish terms, right, helped, and thinking about them in communal terms, really helped suddenly them plan other things. So I just want to be very clear. I'm not taking credit for anything at all, just for helping people in decision-making situations, trying to reframe the way they're thinking and maybe giving them better language for what they're trying to understand and do. Um, I wanna I wanna go and say something about the parsha, which for me is very meaningful, and then open up for questions in different ways. Um, One of the things that has been most painful, I think, um, has been looking at people who have served in the army and in the security apparatuses in Israel who know they messed up and that still need to continue to be in leadership positions. Um, um, and I've had on three situations opportunities to have conversations with people at relatively senior positions inside the army and the Shin Bet. Um, and this week, when I was reading the Parsha, I suddenly realized something about their situation. On Tuesday mornings, I study Meshech Chochma with two chavrutas of mine, and it's a wonderful space. We one of them is a member of Knesset in the past, and one of them is the editor of Makor Rishon, Israel's sort of more right-wing religious newspaper. And we study Meshech Chochma, Rabbi Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk, who is both a favorite of the Haredi world and a favorite of Yeshayahu Leibovich, so you can understand that he's a diverse thinker in different ways. And the Meshech Chochma, throughout all of the parashot from Kitisa until Achrei Mot, keeps going to one theme, which is Aharon messed up. Aharon messed up at the golden calf. And the way the Meshech Chochma reads it, after Moshe comes down from the mountain, even though he was told by God that Aharon should be the priest, Moses doesn't actively do anything. For 6 parashot, he doesn't do anything actively to make Aaron back into the high priest. He's told to give Aaron and his children garments to prepare them in different ways, and he doesn't do it in Kitisa, and he doesn't do it in Vayakel, and he doesn't do it in Pekude. He doesn't, and only at the end of Parashat Vayikra does Moshe actually redesignate Aharon as a Kohen, and only when God chides him not once but twice. And it's really the Meshech Chochmah is the first to sort of point this out. And I think that part of what he's pointing out is that Moshe is not sure it's a good idea to give back Aharon the responsibility and the right to go and be the one who's going to atone for all of Israel. And tragically, when Nadav and Avihu are killed in the sanctuary because of their own mistakes, because of a mistake maybe that they didn't do, because of this foreign fire that they mistakenly placed or purposefully placed, only then in some ways do both Aharon and Moshe understand that they can now re-enter into their roles. When we think about that in the context of our own situation, of what does it mean, and we can talk forever about our anger at our enemies and their insidious and terrible plans. But when I look at this from the realm of responsibility, of achrayut, Aharon bears the names of the people of Israel on his shoulders. He knows he's let them down in the past. In some ways, only because he's let them down in the past does he understand how heavy that burden is. And so when he's told, Ali kanes bechol et el HaKodesh, when he's told at the beginning of Parashat HaChaimot, right, you can't drink wine, you can't just enter whenever you want into the Kodesh, and you need to, and that you yourself need to be someone who is atoned for, right? That is the moment when Aharon can then really become the high priest himself. I wish on our political level, that's a conversation we would be having now. Unfortunately, we're not. Our political leaders are not interested in a conversation about responsibility. But our civil servants are. Anyone who was anyone who served in a security role around October 7th feels like Aharon now. Feels like they let the people down. And they can blame Moses, and they can blame God, and they can blame the golden calf, and they can blame the Yetzer Hara, and they can blame the Asapsuf. There are a million people to blame. But as peoples of responsibility, they actually know what it means to hold on and to bear that responsibility. And I think that a big part of what I've been asking myself and trying to ask both our community members and people I speak to is, how do we build a conversation of responsibility after letting ourselves down so much? And I think that in that sense, there's the sense that we have let ourselves down by letting our guard down, by not understanding what we were up against, by not understanding our enemies, by not understanding our partners. I hope this is landing for you somewhere. I think the story of Aharon being the Kohen Gadol who knows that he has let his people down and is building a way out of that is powerful. And I will also say on the flip side is the Meshech Chochmah is able to say Nadav and Avihu needed, right, or in some way it was justified that they died. He quotes Moshe saying Nadav and Avihu were of a higher spiritual level. Moshe says, I thought it was going to be me and you, Aaron, who would have to be killed at the consecration of the Mishkan. And the fact that it was Nadav and Avihu tells me that they were at a higher spiritual level. And I read that in the Meshech Chochmah, and I could find comfort in that and say, here God has taken the best. And I'm sorry, but I refuse to say that. I read the Meshech Chochmah, and maybe he might be right about Nadav and Avihu, but I can't read that and read that about people who are close to me who we've lost. I won't say names because then the Zoom will be, I'll ruin my laptop with tears. So as we move out of Achrei and out of this episode of the pain of the mistake of Aaron, I think now we can sort of move into Kedoshim. I hope that we can move back into building a society. And I think a big part of the work has been, if I go back to my words at Yom Ha'atzmaut at Klausner, is more than anything else now, we need political imagination. More than anything else now, we need to imagine what is the kind of society that we would like to build and live in, even if we're far away from it, even if it might take 1 year or 2 years or 50 years or another 77 years to build it. But we need a future oriented conversation. And that's something that I've been sharing both in my synagogue, but mostly at my work with media leaders and cultural leaders. If we're looking for someone to help us imagine a future, it might be a distant future. We don't know what years we might need. And please God, may they be good years, but feels like they're probably going to be harrowing years ahead. How would we start talking about what's happening moving, 10 years or 20 years or 30 years from now to build that political imagination where we can perhaps think again about Israel as a chevrat mofet, as a model society, Israel as a community that really does try to achieve Kedoshim Tiyu, Ki Kadosh Ani.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes. I think it's an opportunity to offer anyone who has a reaction of some sort, a question or a comment, and maybe we'll just go around, and then Mish, you can have a final word. Before we get there, I just want to say two things. First of all, to invite people to put on your calendars now that on June 24th, we're going to hear from another stellar YCT Musmach in Rabbi Jacob Siegel, who's doing amazing work in a very different realm, a very different type of Rabbanut. And his topic is going to be Put Your Money Where Your Soul Is, Jewish Approaches to Ethical Investing. He's writing a book. He's doing a lot of wonderful work in a very different kind of realm in the United States. And Rav Mish, before we go around, I just want to show everyone a picture that I have here. I'm grateful to you, Rav Mish, because this picture is the Shiva room, as you described it, at the library in Tel Aviv, where 40 days after the war started on November 16th, 2023, I had the opportunity to sit with Rav Avi and a few other people with the mother of Amit Susana, who came out of captivity about 10 days later in that round of negotiations and releases that took place in that ceasefire. And she needed to talk with rabbis. And she actually told us at the time, I'm only coming to Kikara Chatufim today because I heard that there are rabbis there who want to meet with me. And to say that there's a need for Rabbanim and Rabbaniyot on the ground doing this work, not always taking the credit for it, but yes, influencing behind the scenes. And so we'll give you the credit for that. I just want to say thank you for giving us the space to have this conversation today and to have that conversation almost a year and a half ago. That was so meaningful and that we continue to learn from. And just to say, wow, there's a lot to continue to reflect. And I'll ask people if they have anything they'd like to say, just unmute yourselves. We're a small group. Go ahead. We'll take it from there in the 5 minutes or so that we have left.
Just also having been in Israel for these last couple of months and feeling so much the intensity, both the feelings, the depression, the sadness, but the incredible dynamism and vitality. And I appreciate, Mishael, your honest emotion, because you feel it all the time there. You just feel it, and you just want to be, hopeful, and it will be better days. And I like the way you use that political imagination to create a future and talk about a future. So thank you so much for sharing and the value of applying what we know in Torah to current situations. I really appreciate it very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rilla.
Time for one final comment if anyone wants to jump in.
I'll do the jumping. Nachshon ben Aminatav. I found the last theme that you were working on about Aaron and Moshe and their positions and losing the stature of their position and all of that. I found that to be profound and something very new to me. And I wonder, what do we learn from the fact that the Torah doesn't talk about that explicitly and leaves it to sort of a deeper investment in the parshiot and the subtlety of that whole thing? Is there another dimension of this beyond simply stating that this is part of the dynamic?
Hmm.
Oh, and I want to say one more thing. I went to high school with Rob Bigman. We
In
graduated
Detroit?
in Chicago. He's
In
from
Chicago.
Detroit.
It's just,
It was,
right.
we went to Toki Yeshiva.
Amazing.
I stayed on
Yeshiva.
Yeshiva, right? Um, we never crossed paths after that. Although he became obviously a very well-known rabbinic figure, and but anyway, the last time I saw him was in June of 1972 at graduation.
Wow.
But I know he's
Send him regards.
please do, please do. And back to the question, if there's time to offer any insights on why it would be kept quiet by the Torah and under the surface about Moshe and Aaron.
Yeah, I'd love to hear one or two more comments. I'll just say very briefly, I think part of Aharon is all about tzniut and subtlety. That's why he doesn't speak after his children are killed. And he lashes out at Moses just once. And when he does, Moses says, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So there's something there about what is not said. In the Mishkan, there's no talking. There's no talking in the Mikdash. It's something we don't notice, but Yisrael Knoll has pointed that out. There's you talk on Sotah, you talk in Arameo Vedavi, no other talking. So there's something interesting to explore there. Something for me to think about as we're reading the Parsha this Shabbat.
The sounds of silence, really.
Yeah.
Sharon, Nina, Steve?
I'll just add, and then I have to jump off because of the hour. I always enjoy it when I hear a rabbi talking about how people self or herself or anyone in a leadership role goes outside of the box, right? It's not just my community, the people in my shul. You acknowledged you have a shul, right? It's everybody. My responsibility, I have a responsibility here beyond that, as you said, to the greater community in Israel, whether you reach them through, the myriad ways you mentioned or any other way. And I think, you'd like to see it in good times, but particularly when times are difficult, right? That you see that sense of, I'm trying to think of a word that isn't arevut or community building, but those seem to be the words that come to mind, right? Of going, taking that, going the extra mile and saying, we're part of this world, and how do we connect with each other, and how do we provide support, how do we provide meaning? So I really enjoyed hearing that. And as I said, unfortunately, I do have to pop off because of the time. But again, thank you for offering this. It was a really lovely way to learn a little Torah in the middle of the day.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you. Steve, it looked like you unmuted yourself.
Yes, I don't know if there's time to answer this. When you were speaking before of this radio program on Friday afternoon, which was like a Kabbalah Shabbat for the nation, and the aspects of Shiva at Kikar Hatufim, I wonder when there are like traditional Jewish ideas behind practices that are being brought to like the broader Israeli society. How important is it that they be identified, that the listeners know you are getting a traditional Jewish product here? Does that help them, connect to their Judaism, or does that feel like they're being like forced to participate in something religious, which is something maybe they don't want to happen to them? And how do you balance those two?
Yeah. Wow. I wonder about that all the time. I think that whenever I ask that of the people in arts and culture that I speak to, they always remind me, they say, you're an educator. You're so didactic. You need to give a title to everything. You need to explain what it is. The power of what we do is that we simply do it. And then people find themselves immersed in it. And I'm like, no, but give language to it. Frame for them. Give the scaffolding so they can understand. And they say, good, you do that. We're just going to do it. And people will find themselves in it. And that will be deeply meaningful. I think that's a challenge. I think the greatest strength of Israeli Judaism that's outside the synagogue are in its transparencies, in the fact that we simply speak Hebrew. that the street on which Kikar HaTufim is at is called the Rehov Shaul HaMelech. How tragic is that, right? But no one, it's the transparency of it that makes it so powerful. Part of our work is to make the transparent not muvan me'elav, not so obvious that only when you show up as an Israeli in Palo Alto, suddenly you're like, oh, I actually miss my Jewish identity. Why don't I know how to do anything with it, right? But on the other hand, the power of culture is that it shows, it doesn't tell. So I accept that even though I want to put a little sticker on everything and say, don't you get it? This is what Shlomo El-Kabetz did in the 16th century in Tzfat. And they're like, we're just doing it. And that's more powerful in so many ways.
It's funny because it's exactly the same point about the Moshe and Aharon and their position. It's exactly the same. It's there if you are sensitive to it, but we're not going to put a sticker on it.
Right, right. And maybe that's what priests and performance artists have over rabbis.
I'm going to put a sticker on this and say that this was amazing and inspiring and so much to think about, and just my head is spinning with ideas and emotions. So thank you, Rav Mish, and thank you all for joining in.